It was just another peaceful Sunday morning, or so I thought. I was in our backyard, tending to the garden I'd built from scratch over the last 5 years, when Sarah stormed out with a cold smile on her face. "Pack your things and get out," she said, dropping my duffel bag at my feet. "This house is mine now, and I've already changed the locks." The way she laughed afterward still echoes in my mind. She had no idea that her perfect plan had one fatal flaw. The house she was so confidently claiming, it was solely in my name. The morning had started like any other weekend. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The air was crisp with early autumn freshness, carrying the sweet scent of the ripening tomatoes I'd carefully nurtured all summer. My garden had become my sanctuary over the years, a place where the chaos of life seemed to settle into an orderly rhythm of growth and care. Each plant had its story, each bed a chapter in the book of patience and dedication I'd been writing season after season. I was kneeling beside the herb garden, carefully pruning the overgrown basil plants. Sarah had always complained about their aggressive growth, but I loved their persistent vitality. The weekend had been unusually quiet, now that I think about it. Sarah had spent most of her time locked away in our home office, making hushed phone calls and typing furiously on her laptop, but I hadn't thought much of it. As a corporate lawyer, she often brought work home on weekends. The garden had been my weekend project for the past 5 years, transforming what was once a patchy, neglected lawn into a thriving oasis of vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Sarah never understood my dedication to it. "Waste of time," she'd say, rolling her eyes at my dirt-covered hands and weathered gardening clothes. "We could just buy everything at Whole Foods." But to me, it was more than just growing food. It was about creating something real, something that grew stronger with each passing season. I was just finishing up with the basil, imagining the pesto I'd make later when I heard the back door slam. The sound was sharp, deliberate, meant to get my attention. Looking up, I saw Sarah standing on the patio, her designer sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She was dressed immaculately, as always, in a crisp white blouse and tailored pants that probably cost more than my entire gardening setup. But something was different about her stance, her energy. She held herself like someone about to deliver what they thought was a knockout punch. "Time's up, Mark," she announced, her voice carrying across the yard with theatrical coldness. She took a few steps forward, swinging my old navy duffel bag as if it were a trophy. "I've been planning this for months, and today's the day you learn what it feels like to lose everything." I stood slowly, brushing the dirt from my knees. The morning sun cast long shadows across the garden beds, and a strange calm settled over me as I watched her, despite the surreal scene unfolding before me. Part of me had known this moment was coming. Maybe not exactly like this, but something had been brewing. The late-night phone calls, the sudden interest in our property documents, the mysterious meetings with her friend Jennifer, who just happened to be a real estate agent. The signs had been there for weeks, little discordant, notes in the symphony of our daily lives. The way she'd been systematically removing family photos from the walls, claiming she was redecorating. The sudden interest in our filing system, which she'd always dismissed as my obsessive need for order. The careful questions about our finances, masked as casual conversation. "What exactly are you talking about, Sarah?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. I noticed her phone was in her hand, recording. Of course, she wanted to capture her moment of triumph, probably planning to use it later to show how reasonable she'd been in the face of what she expected to be my emotional breakdown. She tossed the duffel bag at my feet, and it landed with a dull thud on the garden path I'd laid myself 2 summers ago. "I'm talking about your eviction, dear husband. I've already had the locks changed. Your clothes are in the bag. Well, the ones I didn't. You donate. The house is mine now, and you have exactly 1 hour to get out before I call the police. The confidence in her voice was absolute. She stood there in her expensive outfit, designer sunglasses catching the morning light, absolutely certain she had orchestrated the perfect coup. She truly believed she had thought of everything, that her careful planning had left no room for failure. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that her perfect plan had overlooked one crucial detail. A detail buried in the paperwork she never bothered to read when we refinanced the house last year. I could have told her right then, could have wiped that smug smile off her face with a single sentence. But sometimes the best response is patience. So instead I picked up the duffel bag and met her gaze. "Is that everything?" I asked calmly. My response clearly wasn't what she expected. Her smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered, adjusting her sunglasses with manicured fingers. That betrayed the slightest tremor. "You have 59 minutes now, Mark, tick-tock." As I walked past her toward the house, my house, I could feel her eyes boring into my back. She was waiting for the breakdown, the pleading, the anger. She had her phone ready to capture whatever emotional outburst she expected, probably already planning how she would use it to paint herself as the reasonable party in whatever story. She planned to tell our friends. The garden stretched out behind me, a living testament to the power of patience and careful attention. Each plant, each flower, each carefully tended bed stood as a quiet witness to this moment when Sarah's calculated cruelty met something she hadn't counted on: my capacity for calm in the face of chaos. I just needed to make one phone call first. The pieces were already in place. They had been for months, though Sarah, in her rush to claim victory, had never noticed. The quiet husband she thought she knew so well was about to show her just how much she had underestimated him. Standing in the kitchen, surrounded by the granite countertops I'd installed myself and the herb garden window box I'd built for Sarah. 3 summers ago, I took a moment to process what had just happened. The morning sun streamed through the windows, highlighting the floating dust particles in the air, making everything feel surreal, like a scene from someone else's life. Sarah followed me inside, maintaining what she thought was a safe distance. She was still recording with her phone, narrating under her breath about how calm and collected she was being during this difficult but necessary moment. I almost laughed at the performance. After 12 years of marriage, I knew this side of her well, the carefully constructed image she presented to the world, always making sure she came across as the reasonable one, the victim if necessary. "The timer's running, Mark," she announced, checking her designer watch, the one I'd given her for our 10th anniversary. 53 minutes left, though I have to say you're taking this better than I expected." There was a note of disappointment in her voice, like a child whose surprise failed to shock. I opened the kitchen cabinet, reaching for my favorite coffee mug, the chipped blue one Sarah had tried to throw away countless times. "Mind if I make a cup of coffee first?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Seems like we both have time for that." Her perfectly manicured fingers tightened around her phone. "Are you not understanding what's happening here? This isn't a casual Sunday morning anymore. This house, everything in it. It's all mine now. I've made sure of it." I filled the coffee maker with water, measuring out the grounds with deliberate precision. Each movement felt heightened, significant somehow. "How exactly did you make sure of that, Sarah? I'm curious about the details." She laughed, that sharp, hollow sound I'd grown to recognize over the years, the one that meant she thought she was several steps ahead. "Oh, you want details? Fine. I've been working with Jennifer. You remember Jennifer, right? Top real estate agent in the county. We've been planning this for months. The house has already been transferred into my name. All the paperwork was finalized last week." I pressed the brew button, watching the first drops of coffee fall into the pot. "Interesting. And how exactly did you manage that? Does it matter?" She was pacing now, her Jimmy Choo heels clicking against the hardwood floors. "The point is, it's done. You can call whatever lawyer you want. but you'll just be wasting your time and what little money you have left in your personal account. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The beef coffee maker gurgled, filling the kitchen with the rich aroma of French roast. I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts with unhurried movements. You know what's funny, Sarah? About 6 months ago, when we did that refinancing on the house, you remember that day? She waved her hand dismissively. What about it? You were so busy that day, had that big meeting with your clients, the Hendersons. You barely had time to stop by the bank, just rushed in to sign the papers. I found the contact I was looking for, Robert Chen, our family lawyer. Well, my lawyer now. You didn't even read them, did you? Something flickered across her face, the first hint of uncertainty I'd seen all morning. What are you talking about? I poured my coffee, adding a splash of cream. You just signed where the banker pointed, like you always do. I trust you to handle all this boring stuff. That's what you always said, right? I took a sip, letting the warmth spread through my chest. Did Jennifer happen to pull the actual property records when she was helping you with your little plan? Sarah's phone lowered slightly, her perfectly orchestrated video momentarily forgotten. Of course she did. She's the best in the business. She wouldn't have missed. Call her, I suggested, leaning against the counter. Right now. Ask her to double-check who actually owns this house. You're just trying to buy time, she snapped, but I could see the first cracks in her confidence. This is pathetic, Mark. Accept that you've lost and leave with whatever dignity you have left. I held up my phone, showing her Robert's contact information. I'm about to call Robert. Would you like to know what he's going to tell me? Or would you prefer to hear it from Jennifer first? Her fingers flew across her phone screen, presumably texting Jennifer. The silence that followed was heavy with tension, broken only by the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. A wedding gift from her parents, ironically enough. You know what your problem always was, Sarah? You never paid attention to the details. You were always too focused on the big picture, the end goal, the perfect image you wanted to project. I took another sip of coffee. But sometimes the details are everything. Her phone buzzed. The color drained from her face as she read whatever message had just come through. This isn't possible, she whispered, more to herself than to me. Jennifer says, let me guess, Jennifer just discovered that the house is solely in my name, that when we refinanced, the new deed was issued to me alone. I set my coffee mug down. You signed off on that, Sarah. It's all there in the paperwork. You couldn't be bothered to read. She stared at me, her carefully applied makeup doing nothing to hide the shock and fury warring on her face. You planned this, she accused, her voice shaking. You knew this would happen. No, Sarah. I didn't plan anything. I just paid attention. Something you might want to try sometime. I picked up my duffel bag, the one she'd so triumphantly presented earlier. Now, about those new locks you mentioned. The confidence that had radiated from her just minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by something closer to panic. She was rapidly typing on her phone, presumably trying to figure out how to salvage her failed power play. Her perfect Sunday morning. Ambush was unraveling, and we both knew it. You can't just, she started, but I cut her off. Actually, I can, but unlike you, I'm not going to demand you leave in an hour. I pulled out my own phone again. I'm going to give you a reasonable amount of time to find a new place. Because that's what decent people do, Sarah. They don't ambush their spouse on a Sunday morning and try to throw them out of their own house. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on either of us. The very house she'd tried to claim, the home she'd so confidently believed was her new starting point, had become the symbol of her miscalculation. All those secret meetings with Jennifer, all the careful planning, undone by her own habit of ignoring the fine print. I watched as she sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her phone falling silent in her lap. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, illuminating the space we'd shared for so many years. But now, like everything else between us, it would never look quite the same again. The next few hours unfolded like scenes from a movie I never thought I'd be starring in. After the initial shock wore off, Sarah's reactions cycled through a predictable pattern: denial, anger, desperate negotiation, and finally, a simmering rage that filled every corner of our once peaceful home. But I maintained my composure, drawing strength from a well of patience I didn't even know I possessed. I retreated to my home office, the one room in the house that had always been exclusively mine. Sarah had never shown any interest in this space, claiming it was too cluttered with my books, documents, and various certificates from architectural courses I'd taken over the years. Now, sitting in my worn leather chair, another item she'd tried to replace countless times, I began making the necessary calls. First was Robert Chen, my lawyer. I put the phone on speaker as I organized the property documents I'd kept meticulously filed away. "Robert, I need your help with something urgent." "Mark, it's Sunday morning." He paused, probably checking the time. "Is everything all right?" I could hear Sarah in the kitchen, her voice rising and falling as she presumably tried to damage control with Jennifer. "Not exactly. Sarah just tried to evict me from our house, claiming she's had it transferred to her name. She's already changed the locks." Robert's laugh was short and disbelieving. "The house that's solely in your name? That house? The very same." I pulled out the deed, even though I'd memorized every word. "I need you to draft whatever legal documents necessary to protect my position here. She's already taken some action with the property. I'm not sure exactly what yet, but she mentioned paperwork being finalized last week. Any attempted transfer would be void," Robert said, his voice taking on the professional tone I'd come to appreciate over the years. "She can't legally sell or transfer property she doesn't own, but let me look into what she might have tried. This could actually create some serious legal issues for her if she's accepted any money or signed fraudulent documents." The word fraudulent hung in the air, heavy with implications. From the kitchen, I heard something shatter, probably one of our wedding presents based on Sarah's following curse. "I also need your advice on how to handle the immediate situation," I continued, keeping my voice low. "She's still in the house, and given her current state, I'm concerned about what she might do next." Robert was silent for a moment, probably taking notes. "First things first, document everything. If she's made any threats, written any messages, tried to force you out, write it all down. Take photos if there's any damage to property. Don't engage in any heated arguments, and if you feel threatened at any point, don't hesitate to call the police." As if on cue, Sarah appeared in the doorway of my office, her face flushed with anger. "Who are you talking to?" she demanded, trying to peer at my phone screen. "My lawyer," I replied calmly, meeting her gaze. "Would you like to speak with him?" She recoiled as if I'd physically pushed her. "You're really going to fight me on this? After everything I've done for you?" Robert, still on speaker, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Thompson, as your husband's attorney, I strongly advise you to cease any attempts to force him from the property. Any actions you've taken regarding the house, without his knowledge or consent, could have serious legal consequences." Sarah's laugh was brittle, bordering on hysterical. "Legal consequences? I built this life while he played in his garden and took random architecture courses. I deserve this house." "The property deed states otherwise," Robert replied evenly. "Mark, I'll email you those documents within the hour. Mrs. Thompson, I suggest you seek legal counsel of your own." After ending the call, I watched as Sarah paced the length of my office, her designer outfit now slightly disheveled, her perfect hair coming loose from its careful styling. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she spat, "sitting there with your files and your lawyer, acting all calm and collected." I leaned back in my chair, maintaining the composure that seemed to infuriate her so much. I'm not trying to be clever, Sarah. I'm just protecting what's legally mine. Something you might want to think about regarding whatever actions you've taken with the house." She stopped pacing, her hands clenching into fists. "You have no idea what I've done, what I've sacrificed, while you were content to stay in your comfortable job, putter around in that ridiculous garden. I was the one pushing us forward, making connections, building our life." "Our life?" I raised an eyebrow. "The one you were ready to destroy this morning? The one where you planned to throw me out of my own house without warning?" "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she muttered, more to herself than to me. "Jennifer said it would be simple, quick. You weren't supposed to fight back." The admission hung in the air between us, a testament to how little she really knew me after all these years. "That's the problem, Sarah. You've always underestimated me, assumed I was passive, weak, too focused on my hobbies to notice what was happening around me." She sank into the chair across from my desk, suddenly looking deflated. "What are you going to do now?" "Right now? I'm going to continue sitting in my office, in my house, waiting for my lawyer to send those documents. What are you going to do?" Her phone buzzed again. Probably Jennifer with more bad news. Sarah glanced at the screen and visibly flinched. "This isn't over," she said, standing abruptly. "You might have won this round, but don't think for a second that I'm going to just walk away with nothing." I watched her storm out of the office, her heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floors. In the silence that followed, I could hear her moving around upstairs, opening and closing drawers, muttering to herself. The sound of her barely contained chaos was a sharp contrast to the quiet order of my office, where everything had its place, every document its proper file. Looking around at the space she'd always dismissed as cluttered and unnecessary, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. All those times she'd mocked my obsession with keeping proper records, my insistence on reading every document before signing. It had all led to this moment. Her perfectly planned ambush had fallen apart because she couldn't be bothered with details, couldn't see past her own assumptions about who I was and what I was capable of. I pulled out my phone again, this time to call my brother Michael. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful. "Hey, little brother, how's your Sunday going?" "Interesting," I replied, unable to keep a touch of dark humor from my voice. "Sarah tried to kick me out of the house this morning. Apparently, she thought she'd had it transferred to her name." Michael's sharp intake of breath was followed by a string of colorful expletives. "She did what? Please tell me you're about to say that backfired spectacularly. Let's just say she didn't read the refinancing documents as carefully as she should have." I could hear Sarah's footsteps overhead, moving from room to room with increasing urgency. "Think I could stay with you for a few days, though? Not because I have to, but I think some space might be good while the legal side of things gets sorted out." "Of course, man. My guest room's yours as long as you need it." He paused. "Want me to come over? Sounds like you might want a witness around." I considered the offer, listening to the continuing chaos upstairs. "Maybe in a bit. Let me handle the immediate situation first. Robert's sending over some documents, and I need to make sure everything's properly documented before I leave." After hanging up with Michael, I began methodically photographing my office, paying special attention to any important documents and files. The sound of Sarah's movements had changed. She seemed to be focusing on our bedroom now. Part of me wondered what she was doing, but I forced myself to stay focused on the task at hand. Whatever she was planning, I needed to make sure I had everything properly documented and secured. My phone pinged with an email from Robert, the promised documents, along with a detailed list of recommended actions and precautions. As I read through them, I could feel the full weight of the situation settling over me. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about standing my ground, about finally showing Sarah that her assumptions about me, about our entire marriage, had been wrong all along. The morning's events kept replaying in my mind. Her triumphant smile as she dropped my duffel bag, the casual cruelty of her planned eviction, the absolute certainty in her voice when she claimed the house was hers. She had been so sure of her victory, so confident in her power play, that she never stopped to consider she might have overlooked something crucial. That oversight was going to cost her dearly. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the office windows as I finished documenting everything. Sarah's agitated movements upstairs had finally ceased, replaced by an uneasy silence that felt more threatening than her earlier rage. Experience had taught me that with Sarah, silence usually preceded her most calculated moves. I was proved, right when my phone began buzzing with messages, not from Sarah, but from our mutual friends and family members. She had wasted no time in crafting her narrative. "Mark, are you okay? Sarah says you're having some kind of breakdown." That was from Karen, her best friend. "Hey man, heard about the house situation. Want to talk?" "James, our neighbor. Call me ASAP. Sarah's telling everyone you're trying to steal the house from her." "Lisa, my sister." I set my phone aside, refusing to engage in the social media war she was undoubtedly launching. Instead, I began methodically copying important files to my external hard drive: financial records, property documents, email correspondences. The steady hum of the computer and the rhythmic clicking of the mouse helped center my thoughts. A soft knock on the office door broke my concentration. Sarah stood there, her appearance noticeably changed. Gone was the designer outfit from this morning, replaced by a simple sweater and jeans. Her makeup had been refreshed, and her eyes held a calculated softness that I recognized from countless previous arguments. "Mark," she said, her voice gentle, "can we talk? Like rational adults?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk, not pausing in my file backup. "Of course." She sat down, smoothing her jeans with practiced nervousness. "I've been thinking about this morning, and I realize I may have acted hastily." She leaned forward, attempting to catch my eye. "We've been together for 12 years. Surely we can work this out without lawyers and threats." I finally looked up at her, noting the familiar manipulation tactics, the vulnerable posture, the slight tremor in her voice, the way she tilted her head just so. How many times had I fallen for this routine over the years? What exactly would you like to work out, Sarah? The fact that you tried to illegally seize the house, or the story you're currently spreading about my supposed breakdown? She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. People were asking questions. I had to say something, but I can fix that. We can fix everything if you'll just be reasonable. Reasonable. I couldn't help but laugh. Was it reasonable to ambush me in the garden this morning? To change the locks and try to throw me out of my own house? Our house, she corrected quickly. And yes, I admit I handled it badly. But you have to understand, Mark. I've been unhappy for so long, feeling stuck, watching you content with your gardening and your modest job while I fought to build something bigger for us. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. When did you start planning this, Sarah? When did you decide that 12 years of marriage was worth throwing away with a Sunday morning eviction? She shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't like that. Jennifer just mentioned that with the current market, we could get an amazing price for the house. It seemed like the perfect opportunity for a fresh start. For you, I added quietly. A fresh start for you while leaving me with nothing. I was going to offer you a fair settlement, she protested, but we both knew it was a lie. Besides, you're always talking about living simply, about how material things don't matter. I thought you'd understand. I turned my computer screen toward her, showing the string of emails between her and Jennifer that I'd discovered in our shared email account, ones she'd forgotten to delete. You thought I'd understand being thrown out of my house? These emails go back 3 months, Sarah, you and Jennifer planning every detail, discussing how to handle me if I resisted. The color drained from her face as she recognized the emails. You had no right to read those. They're in our shared email account, the one you insisted we set up for household matters. Interesting reading, especially the parts where you discuss how to make me look unstable if I fought back. Sarah stood abruptly, her gentle facade cracking. Fine. You want to play hardball? Let's play. I've already talked to a lawyer of my own. You might own the house, but I'm entitled to half of everything else. Every account, every investment, every piece of furniture, except the ones you already sold, I interrupted, pulling up another document. Like my grandfather's antique desk that mysteriously disappeared last month? Or my collection of first edition books that you claimed were damaged in a water leak, but actually sold on eBay? She froze. How did you know? I've known for weeks. I've documented everything, Sarah. Every missing item, every suspicious transaction. Would you like to see the spreadsheet? Her hands gripped the back of the chair, knuckles turning white. You've been spying on me? No, I've been paying attention. There's a difference. I closed my laptop gently. Just like I paid attention when we refinanced the house. When you were too busy to read the paperwork. When you trusted me to handle all those boring details you couldn't be bothered with. You're enjoying this, aren't you? She accused, her voice rising. Playing the quiet, patient husband who suddenly turns out to be 10 steps ahead. I met her gaze steadily. I'm not enjoying any of this, Sarah. I'm protecting myself from someone who clearly planned to leave me with nothing. The only difference between us is that my protection is legal, while your plan wasn't. She began pacing again, her movements sharp and agitated. So what happens now? You get the house, and I get nothing? Is that your grand plan for revenge? I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in justice. I picked up my phone, showing her the growing list of messages from concerned friends. You can keep spreading whatever stories you want. The truth will come out eventually. The legal documents don't lie. The legal documents, she spat. That's all you care about, isn't it? Your precious paperwork and files and records. What about the 12 years we spent building a life together? Do you mean the 12 years that you were willing to erase with one Sunday morning ambush? I stood up, gathering my laptop and hard drive. I'm going to stay with Michael for a few days. You can use that time to find somewhere else to live. I'll have Robert draw up a fair agreement for the divorce. Divorce? She stepped back as if I'd struck her. You're filing for divorce. Did you think we'd continue living together after this morning, after I'd discovered your plans? I moved toward the door, but she blocked my path. Mark, wait, please. We can work this out. I'll call Jennifer. Tell her there was a misunderstanding. About the house. We can go to counseling, start fresh. I gently stepped around her. The time for that was before you changed the locks and tried to throw me out of my home, before you started selling my belongings behind my back, before you planned to destroy my life while pretending to care about our marriage. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear her following me, her voice rising with each step. You can't just walk away. We need to talk about this. I turned to face her one last time. We're done talking, Sarah. You made your choice this morning. When you dropped that duffel bag at my feet, now you get to live with the consequences. The front door closed behind me with a quiet click, cutting off whatever response she was about to make. The afternoon sun was warm on my face as I walked to my car, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder. In the rearview mirror, I could see Sarah standing in the doorway, her figure growing smaller as I drove away. The patient, quiet husband she'd underestimated had finally shown his true strength, and nothing would ever be the same again. Part 5. Strategic moves. The drive to Michael's house gave me time to think, to process the surreal events of the day. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would normally have me reaching for my camera. Instead, my mind was racing through next steps, calculating moves and counter-moves like a chess player in the middle of a crucial match. Michael was waiting on his front porch when I pulled up, 2 beers already in hand. My older brother had always been the more outwardly protective one, the one who'd confront problems head-on, while I preferred to analyze and plan. Today, I was grateful for both our approaches. "You look surprisingly calm for someone whose wife tried to steal their house this morning," he said, handing me a beer as I climbed the porch steps. I sank into one of his weathered Adirondack chairs, taking a long pull from the bottle. "Trust me, it's all still sinking in." "Want to tell me the whole story?" Michael settled into the chair next to mine. "Your phone call wasn't exactly detailed. I spent the next half-hour recounting everything. The morning ambush, Sarah's confidence, her partnership with Jennifer, the failed power play, and her subsequent attempts at manipulation." Michael listened without interrupting, though I could see his jaw tightening at certain parts. "Jesus, Mark," he finally said, shaking his head. "I knew Sarah could be difficult, but this is next-level crazy. How long do you think she's been planning this?" I pulled out my phone, showing him the emails I'd discovered. At least 3 months of active planning with Jennifer, but looking back, I think she's been laying the groundwork for longer. The way she's been distancing herself from our joint accounts, selling things off gradually, making those comments about how I'm stuck in my career. And you just watched it all happening. Didn't say anything. I smiled slightly. Sometimes the best strategy is to let your opponent think they have the upper hand. Sarah's always underestimated me, seen me as this passive, predictable person she could manipulate. She never bothered to look deeper, to question why I might be so interested in the boring details she ignored. My phone buzzed with another text from Sarah. "The silent treatment, really? How mature. We need to talk about this like adults." Michael peered at the message. "She's really trying to flip this around on you, huh?" "Classic Sarah," I replied, muting the notifications. She's always been good at reshaping narratives to cast herself as either the victim or the reasonable party. By tomorrow, she'll probably have half our friends convinced that I'm being unreasonable and cruel. Speaking of friends, Michael pulled out his own phone. "Lisa's been texting me non-stop. Sarah's apparently been calling everyone, telling them you had some kind of breakdown and tried to claim sole ownership of the house." I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. Of course she is. She's trying to get ahead of the story, control the narrative before the truth comes out. It's what she does, what she's always done. "So, what's your plan?" Michael asked, grabbing us each another beer from the cooler beside his chair. "You're staying here, obviously, but what's the next move?" I took a moment to gather my thoughts, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the trees. "First, I need to secure everything. Robert's already working on the legal documentation, but there's more to protect than just the house. Tomorrow, I'm going to the bank to separate our accounts, change all my passwords, and make sure she can't access anything else in my name." "Smart," Michael nodded. "What about the stuff still in the house?" "I've got photos and documentation of everything valuable. If anything else disappears, it'll just add to the legal issues she's already facing with the fraudulent house transfer attempt." I paused, taking another sip of beer. "The bigger challenge will be managing the social fallout. Sarah's good at playing the victim, and she's got a lot of practice at making me look like the unreasonable one." Michael snorted. "Yeah, I remember the Christmas incident 2 years ago. Somehow you were the bad guy for not wanting to spend 10 grand on a last-minute ski trip." The memory brought a wry smile to my face. She's predictable in her unpredictability. If that makes sense, I know she's going to escalate things, try to force a confrontation. The key is staying calm, keeping everything documented, and letting her dig her own hole deeper. My phone lit up again, this time with an email from Robert. I opened it to find a detailed legal strategy outlined, including steps to protect my assets and documentation needed for the divorce proceedings. The word divorce still felt strange, even after everything that had happened today. "You okay?" Michael asked, noticing my expression. Yeah, just processing. 12 years of marriage, and it ends with her trying to throw me out of my own house. Makes you question everything, you know? Michael was quiet for a moment. Remember what Dad used to say? The truth always comes out in the crisis. Maybe this is Sarah's truth, finally showing itself clearly. Maybe, I agreed, thinking back to all the small moments that had led to this day. The funny thing is, I'm not even angry anymore. I'm just disappointed. In her, in myself, for not seeing it sooner, in what we became. Hey, Michael sat up straighter, his voice firm. Don't do that to yourself. You're not responsible for her choices. She's the one who decided to try and steal your house, sell your stuff behind your back, and then play victim when it all blew up in her face. I nodded, but my mind was already moving forward, planning the next steps. I need to be careful about how I handle this. Sarah's going to try everything she can to salvage her reputation. She's probably already spinning stories about how I've changed, how I'm being cruel or unreasonable. Let her spin, Michael said. The truth has a way of coming out, especially when you've got the documentation to back it up. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a group message from Sarah to our close friends. Concerned about Mark. He's not acting like himself. If anyone hears from him, please let me know he's loved and we can work through this together. I showed the message to Michael, who rolled his eyes. Wow, she works fast, playing the concerned wife while simultaneously planting seeds of doubt about your mental state. It's what she does, I said, putting the phone away. She's trying to build a narrative where she's the loving, patient wife dealing with an unstable husband. It makes her failed house grab look more reasonable in retrospect. So, what's your counter-move? I leaned back in the chair, looking up at the emerging stars. Nothing. I'm going to do absolutely nothing. No social media posts, no group messages, no public statements. I'll let the legal process unfold while she runs herself ragged, trying to control the narrative. Michael grinned. The calm in the storm. Approach. She'll hate that. Exactly. Sarah's never understood the power of patience. She always has to act, to control, to manipulate. My silence will drive her crazy, make her escalate, probably make mistakes. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the night settle in. Finally, Michael stood up, stretching. Guest room's all yours, little brother. Tomorrow, we'll start getting your life untangled from hers. As I followed him inside, I felt a strange sense of peace. The day had started with Sarah trying to destroy my life, but it was ending with me stronger, clearer, and more resolved than ever. She thought she knew me, thought she could predict and control my reactions. She was about to learn just how wrong she'd been. The quiet husband she'd underestimated was about to show her exactly what patient strength looked like. The peace of Sunday evening at Michael's house was short-lived. Monday morning arrived with the kind of chaos only Sarah could orchestrate. By 8 a.m., my phone was flooded with messages from friends and colleagues, each one revealing another layer of the story Sarah had been crafting overnight. Mark, Sarah's really worried about you, says you're having some kind of episode. Tom from work. Hey, heard about the house situation? Sarah mentioned you've been acting erratic lately. Our neighbor Emma. Call me ASAP. Sarah told me you've gone completely off the rails. My cousin Rachel. I set my phone aside and focused on getting ready for the day. I had a clear plan. Bank first, then the locksmith, followed by a meeting with Robert. But Sarah, true to form, had other ideas. I was just finishing my coffee when Michael, who'd been watching through his front window, tensed. Heads up, looks like the circus has arrived. Sarah's red Mercedes pulled into Michael's driveway, and she wasn't alone. Jennifer, her real estate accomplice, sat in the passenger seat. Both women emerged from the car looking like they were dressed for a business meeting rather than a confrontation. Sarah in a crisp blazer and pencil skirt, Jennifer clutching a leather portfolio. Should I stay? Michael asked, already knowing my answer. I shook my head. Go to work, I've got this. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime incongruous with the tension filling the house. I opened the door, maintaining the calm demeanor that had so frustrated Sarah yesterday. Mark, Sarah began, her voice carefully modulated to sound concerned. We need to talk. Jennifer's here to help us resolve this situation professionally. I leaned against the doorframe, blocking their entry. Any discussion can happen through our lawyers, Sarah. You lost the privilege of private conversations when you tried to illegally seize my house. Jennifer stepped forward, her professional mask firmly in place. Mr. Thompson, I think there's been a misunderstanding. If we could just sit down and discuss... A misunderstanding? I pulled out my phone, opening the email app. Would you like me to read the emails where you and Sarah discussed how to transfer my property without my knowledge? Or should we skip to the ones where you advised her on how to make me look unstable if I resisted? The color drained from Jennifer's face. Sarah's expression hardened. You had no right to read those emails. They were in our shared account, Sarah, the one you used to plan how to steal my house. I turned to Jennifer. As a real estate agent, you should know that attempting to transfer property without the owner's consent is fraud. I wonder what the licensing board would think about these emails. Jennifer's professional demeanor cracked. She turned to Sarah, her voice tight. You told me the house was in both your names. You said this would be a simple transfer. It was supposed to be simple, Sarah snapped. If Mark would just be reasonable. I laughed softly, like you were yesterday morning when you tried to throw me out of my own house, when you changed the locks without legal right or notice. I came here to offer you a deal, Sarah said, her voice taking on the sharp edge I knew so well. But if you want to be difficult about this, no deals, no negotiations, not here, not now. I straightened up. Any communication goes through our lawyers. And Jennifer? I met her increasingly nervous gaze. I suggest you retain one of your own. Attempted property fraud is a serious matter. Jennifer stepped back, her professional facade completely shattered. Sarah, I can't be involved in this. You lied to me about the property ownership and now I could lose my license. Jenny. Wait. Sarah reached for her arm, but Jennifer was already heading back to the car. I'm done, Sarah. Find someone else to help you commit fraud. Jennifer's voice carried across the morning air as she stormed off, leaving Sarah standing alone on Michael's porch. Sarah's composed expression had vanished, replaced by the raw anger I'd glimpsed yesterday. You're really going to do this? Destroy everything we built, ruin my reputation, all because you're feeling spiteful. I'm not destroying anything, Sarah. You did that yesterday morning when you dropped that duffel bag at my feet and laughed about kicking me out of my home. Everything that's happening now is just the consequence of your actions. My actions? Her voice rose. What about your actions? Hiding the deed in your name, spying on my emails, turning our friends against me with these ridiculous fraud accusations. I pulled out my phone again, this time starting a video recording. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what I was doing. Please, continue, I said calmly. You were saying something about fraud accusations. Would you like to explain why you tried to sell property that isn't legally yours? She stepped back, her legal training finally kicking in. Turn that off. No, I don't think I will. In fact, I think it's time we had everything on record, like the fact that you admitted to changing the locks on my house without legal right, or how you and Jennifer planned to transfer my property without my knowledge, or consent. You're twisting everything. But she was retreating now, her confidence crumbling. This isn't over, Mark. You think you're so clever with your recordings and your emails and your legal threats. You have no idea what I'm capable of. I kept recording as she stormed back to her car. Actually, Sarah, I think I'm finally seeing exactly what you're capable of, and so is everyone else. She slammed her car door, the Mercedes roaring to life. As she backed out of Michael's driveway, I could see her hands shaking on the steering wheel. Inside, I sent the recording to Robert, adding it to our growing file of evidence. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Everything okay?" "Better than okay," I replied. "Sarah just showed her true colors to Jennifer. Her support system is starting to crumble." The morning's confrontation had confirmed what I'd suspected. Sarah's carefully constructed plan was falling apart, and she was running out of allies. Jennifer's reaction to learning about the fraudulent transfer attempt was just the beginning. As the truth emerged, Sarah would find herself increasingly isolated, her manipulations exposed. I spent the next hour making calls, first to Robert, updating him on the morning's events, then to the bank to arrange an appointment to separate our accounts. With each call, each step forward, I felt stronger, more certain of my path. Sarah had always seen my quiet nature as weakness, my attention to detail as pedestrian, my patience as passivity. She never understood that these very traits would be her undoing. While she rushed to control the narrative, to force confrontations and manipulate perceptions, I would continue to move forward steadily, methodically, letting the truth speak for itself. The quiet husband she'd tried to discard was proving to be her worst nightmare, not through dramatic gestures or public accusations, but through the simple, devastating power of documented truth and patient resolve. By midweek, the fallout from Sarah's failed house grab had spread through our social circle like ripples in a pond. Each new day brought fresh revelations as her carefully constructed facade began to crack under the weight of truth and documentation. The morning started with a call from Claire, Sarah's oldest friend and a partner at her law firm. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me this call was different. "Mark." Claire's usually confident voice sounded hesitant. "Do you have a minute to talk?" I was in Michael's kitchen, reviewing documents Robert had sent over. "Of course, Claire. What's on your mind?" There was a long pause. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. The house transfer Sarah asked me to review last month. She told me it was a routine refinancing document. That wasn't true, was it? I set down my coffee, giving the conversation my full attention. "No, Claire, it wasn't. She was attempting to transfer my property without my knowledge or consent." "Jesus Christ," Claire muttered. I could hear papers rustling in the background. "She used my legal opinion to support her plan. Do you understand what this means? She involved me in attempted fraud." "I'm sorry, Claire. I know Sarah put you in a difficult position." "Difficult?" She laughed bitterly. "I could be disbarred for this. I've already contacted the ethics board to self-report. I had to. It's the only way to protect myself." I could picture Claire in her corner office, probably surrounded by the case files she was known for organizing meticulously. "What did Sarah say when you confronted her?" "That's just it. She's not taking my calls. I've tried reaching her since Jennifer told me what happened, but she's gone dark. Mark, I've known Sarah for 20 years, but this isn't the person I thought I knew." After ending the call with Claire, I sat back, processing this new development. Sarah was losing allies faster than even I had anticipated. First Jennifer, now Claire. Her support system was crumbling, and her response was to retreat rather than face the consequences. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Hope you're happy. Claire's hysterical over nothing. More collateral damage in your revenge campaign." I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to Robert, adding it to our growing documentation of her attempts to deflect responsibility. The doorbell rang. Michael had warned me that Karen, Sarah's best friend from college, might stop by. Sure enough, when I opened the door, Karen stood there looking uncomfortable in a way I'd never seen before. "Mark," she began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with her words. "Can we talk?" I invited her in, noting how different this felt from Sarah and Jennifer's ambush attempt earlier in the week. Karen followed me to the kitchen, declining my offer of coffee. I've been going through my messages with Sarah, she said finally, pulling out her phone. Looking at everything differently now. There's something you should see. She handed me her phone, open to a text conversation from 2 months ago. My stomach tightened as I read Sarah's messages, laying out her plan to start fresh by selling the house quickly and moving away before I could cause problems. She told me you were becoming unstable, Karen continued, her voice thick with emotion. Said you were obsessed with the garden, withdrawing from her, that she was afraid of what you might do if she told you she wanted to leave. I believed her. Mark, I helped her plan this. I handed the phone back, keeping my voice gentle. Sarah's very good at crafting narratives that suit her needs, Karen. You're not the first person she's manipulated. But I should have known better. Karen's composure cracked. All those times she complained about you being boring or holding her back, you were just living your life, weren't you? Working your job, tending your garden, keeping your home in order. Those weren't signs of instability, they were signs of normalcy. I made her a cup of tea, letting her process her realizations. Karen had been part of our lives for over a decade, one of Sarah's most loyal defenders. Watching her worldview shift was both vindicating and sad. There's more, she said finally, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. She's been seeing someone, James, from her firm. The name hit like a physical blow, though I'd had my suspicions. James was Sarah's colleague, a younger attorney known for his aggressive courtroom style and equally aggressive social climbing. How long? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. 6 months, maybe longer. Karen couldn't meet my eyes. She said you two had grown apart, that it was basically over anyway. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. God, I've been such a fool. I absorbed this new information, adding it to the growing picture of Sarah's betrayal. Thank you for telling me, Karen. I know this couldn't have been easy. She stood, gathering her courage. I've saved all the messages, Mark. If you need them for your lawyer, they're yours. It's time the truth came out. After Karen left, I sat in Michael's kitchen, surrounded by legal documents and the weight of new revelations. My phone kept buzzing. Sarah must have realized Karen had talked to me. Her messages grew increasingly frantic. Whatever Karen told you, she's lying. You're turning everyone against me. Answer your phone, Mark. We need to talk about this. You have no idea what you're doing to my life. I forwarded each message to Robert without responding. Sarah's world was unraveling. Not because of any action on my part, but because the truth was finally emerging. Her careful manipulations, her secret plans, her hidden relationship. Everything was coming to light. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Lisa, my sister, looking both angry and determined. You won't believe what Sarah just tried to do, she said, storming past me into the house. She called me, crying about how worried she is about you, asking if I'd talk to you about dropping the fraud accusations. Then she had the nerve to suggest that if I helped convince you, she might be able to arrange for you to keep some of your things from the house. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. She's still trying to negotiate with property she doesn't own. That's not even the best part, Lisa continued, pacing the kitchen. When I told her I knew the truth about the house being in your name, she tried to tell me you'd tricked her into signing the refinancing documents, as if Sarah wouldn't read every word of anything she signed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah's greatest weakness, her assumption that she was always the smartest person in the room, had finally caught up with her. Her attempts to manipulate the situation were backfiring, turning former allies into witnesses to her deception. My phone buzzed with an email from Robert. Claire's testimony about the fraudulent transfer attempt will be invaluable. Also, Karen's messages provide clear evidence of premeditation. Sarah's position is deteriorating rapidly. Recommend maintaining your current strategy of non-engagement. I showed Lisa the email. watching her face light up with satisfaction. "You're really going to win this, aren't you?" she asked. "Not just the house, but the whole thing." "It's not about winning," I replied, though part of me understood her perspective. "It's about truth." Sarah thought she could rewrite reality to suit her needs. She never understood that some things, legal documents, property records, text, messages, can't be manipulated with a smile and a convincing story. Lisa hugged me fiercely. "Well, I'm proud of you, little brother. You're handling this with more grace than she deserves." As the day wound down, I sat on Michael's back porch, watching the sunset and reflecting on how much had changed in just a few days. Sarah's seemingly perfect plan had crumbled not because of any dramatic confrontation, but because the truth had simply refused to bend to her will. The quiet husband she'd underestimated continued to let the facts speak for themselves, while her world fell apart in the silence of unanswered messages and exposed lies. The rest of the week unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony, but not one of Sarah's making. Each day brought new revelations, new allies turning away from her carefully constructed narrative, and new evidence of just how extensively she'd planned my supposed downfall. Thursday morning found me at the bank, sitting across from Marcus, our longtime financial advisor. The look on his face as I showed him the documentation of Sarah's recent activities told me everything I needed to know. "This is concerning," he said, reviewing the transaction history. "These withdrawals from your joint accounts, the attempted property transfer. Mark, why didn't you come to me sooner?" I watched as he scrolled through months of suspicious activities. I needed to understand the full scope first. "How bad is it?" Marcus pulled up several accounts on his screen, his frown deepening. "Over the past 3 months, Sarah's withdrawn nearly $50,000 from your joint accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger sums as she got bolder. She also attempted to access your personal investment account last week, but thankfully our security protocols prevented that. Can you show me the withdrawal patterns?" He turned the screen toward me, pointing out the escalating transactions. "See here? It started with small withdrawals, 2,000 or 3,000 at a time. Then about a month ago, the amounts increased significantly. The latest attempt was for $25,000, just 2 days before her failed house grab. I took photos of everything, sending them directly to Robert. I need to separate all our accounts immediately." "Already working on it," Marcus assured me. "But Mark, there's something else you should know." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Sarah came in last Friday, asking about getting her name added to your personal accounts. She claimed you had authorized it, but something felt off about her request." "What did you tell her?" "That we'd need your direct confirmation and signature." "She wasn't happy about that." He managed a small smile. "Said something about me being too rigid with protocols." As Marcus helped me separate our finances and set up new security measures, my phone buzzed with a message from Karen. "Sarah just called me in tears, saying you're destroying her financially. Thought you should know she's still trying to spin this." I showed the message to Marcus, who shook his head. "Based on these transactions, it looks more like she was the one planning to leave you financially strapped." By the time I left the bank, our joint accounts had been frozen pending legal review, and my personal accounts were secured with additional protection. Sarah would no longer have access to any of our shared funds she'd been steadily draining in preparation for her grand exit. My next stop was the house. Robert had advised documenting everything inside before Sarah could remove or redistribute more of our belongings. Michael insisted on coming with me, just in case. We arrived to find Sarah's car in the driveway, which wasn't entirely unexpected. As we pulled up, I could see her through the living room window, apparently on the phone and pacing, her telltale sign of agitation. "Want me to go in first?" Michael offered, but I shook my head. "No need. This is my house, remember? The moment." We walked in, Sarah's phone call ended abruptly. She spun to face us, her expression cycling through surprise, anger, and finally settling on what I recognized as her reasonable face. "Mark," she said, her voice carefully modulated, "I was just about to call you. We need to talk about what's happening with our accounts." "Our accounts?" I raised an eyebrow, setting my camera bag on the counter. "You mean the ones you've been systematically draining for the past 3 months?" Her composure flickered. "I was protecting our assets. Given your recent behavior—" "Save it, Sarah," Michael interrupted. "We've seen the bank records." She shot him a venomous look. "This is between my husband and me. You don't need to be here." "Actually, he does," I said, taking out my camera. "He's here as a witness while I document everything in the house, to prevent any more of my belongings from mysteriously disappearing or getting accidentally damaged." Sarah's face flushed. "So that's how it's going to be? You're going to paint me as some kind of thief?" "No, Sarah. Your own actions are doing that quite effectively." I started taking photos, beginning with the living room. "By the way, where's my grandfather's watch collection? The one that was in the study last week?" She crossed her arms. "I had them appraised for insurance purposes." "Really? Because according to these online listings," I pulled up screenshots on my phone, "they're currently for sale on 3 different auction sites." The color drained from her face. "You're spying on me?" "No, I'm protecting my property. There's a difference." I continued photographing the room, just like I'm documenting everything else before it can be appraised or suffer any unfortunate accidents. Michael moved through the house with me, taking notes as I photographed each room. Sarah followed us, her protests growing increasingly desperate as we uncovered more evidence of her preparations: empty spaces where valuable items had been, drawers cleared of important documents, closets partially emptied. "You don't understand," she insisted as we entered the master bedroom. "I was going to tell you about everything. I just needed to secure our assets first." "You mean my assets?" I corrected her, photographing the now empty spaces in my closet where my best suits had hung. "The ones you've been selling off piece by piece while planning your exit strategy." "Exit strategy?" She laughed, but it sounded hollow. "I was trying to save our marriage. If you'd just listened to me, tried to understand—" "Understand what?" "Sarah, your secret relationship with James, your plans to sell my house out from under me, the systematic liquidation of my family heirlooms." She froze. "Who told you about James?" "Does it matter? The truth has a way of coming out, especially when people start looking closely at things you'd rather keep hidden." As we finished our documentation, Sarah's phone buzzed repeatedly. Probably James, wondering why she wasn't responding to his messages. The irony wasn't lost on me. "What are you going to do with all these photos?" she asked as we prepared. "To leave. Everything's going to Robert, along with the bank records, email, timestamps of your attempted property transfer, and statements from the various people you involved in your plans." I met her gaze steadily. "The truth is coming out, Sarah, whether you're ready for it or not." Her composure finally cracked. "You're trying to ruin me. All these accusations, turning our friends against me, freezing our accounts. You're destroying everything I've worked for." "No, Sarah. You did that yourself, the moment you decided to try and steal my house and clean out our accounts." I headed for the door, Michael close behind. "By the way, you have until the end of the week to find somewhere else to live. Robert will be serving you with official notice tomorrow." As we drove away, I could see Sarah standing in the doorway, her phone pressed to her ear, probably calling James, or her lawyer, or whoever else she thought might help salvage her rapidly. "Deteriorating situation. You okay?" Michael asked as we turned onto the main road. I thought about the empty spaces in the house, the missing items, the evidence of Sarah's methodical preparation for what she'd thought would be her triumph. "Yeah, I'm okay. Sometimes seeing the truth clearly is better than living with comfortable lies." The quiet husband, who supposedly never paid attention to important things, had just documented every detail of her betrayal. And there was nothing she could do about it. Friday morning brought a development I hadn't expected, though perhaps I should have. James, Sarah's not-so-secret boyfriend, appeared at Michael's door just as I was preparing to leave for work. He looked nothing like the confident lawyer I'd met at firm events. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his expression haunted. "We need to talk," he said, shifting nervously on the porch. "It's about Sarah." I studied him for a moment, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the way his expensive suit seemed to hang awkwardly on his frame. "Come in." Michael, who had been about to leave for work himself, caught my eye. I nodded slightly, letting him know it was okay to go. As he left, James took a seat at the kitchen table, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Coffee," I offered more, out of habit than hospitality. "No, I can't stay long." He ran a hand through his already messy hair. "Look, I know about everything. The house, the accounts, the items she's been selling. Sarah told me it was all planned out, that you had agreed to a separation and property division." I leaned against the counter, watching him squirm. "And you believe that?" "She's very convincing," he said quietly. "But then, yesterday, after you confronted her at the house, she called me in a panic, started talking about moving money around, creating new accounts, finding ways to secure assets before things got worse." He pulled out his phone. "She wanted me to help her access offshore banking options. That was new information. And I'm an attorney, Mark. I know what fraud looks like." He placed his phone on the table, sliding it toward me. "She's been texting me all night, getting more desperate with each message. I think she's planning something drastic." I picked up his phone, reading through the messages. Sarah's text started relatively composed, but grew increasingly frantic as the night progressed. The latest ones made my blood run cold. "We need to move fast. I can transfer everything before they freeze the rest of the accounts. I've got a plan to access his investment portfolio. Just need your help with the legal paperwork. If we do this right, we can be on a plane by Sunday. Everything's arranged." I took photos of the messages, immediately sending them to Robert. "Why are you showing me this?" James looked miserable. "Because I'm not going to risk my law license for her, and because—" he hesitated, "because I'm starting to realize I don't know her at all. The Sarah I thought I knew wouldn't do these things. The Sarah you thought you knew was a carefully constructed image," I said, my voice neutral. "Just like the wife I thought I knew." He stood abruptly. "I've already contacted the Bar Association to self-report my involvement, limited as it was. I'm not going down with her, Mark." He headed for the door, then paused. "She's at the house. Now, by the way, said something about securing important documents before you could get to them." After James left, I immediately called Robert, updating him on this new development. His response was immediate and decisive. "I'm filing for an emergency injunction right now," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to get to the house before she can destroy or remove any more evidence. Stay where you are. I'm sending someone to meet you." Within 30 minutes, a police officer and a court representative were at Michael's door. With the emergency injunction in hand, we headed to the house. The scene we found there would have been comical if it wasn't so tragic. Sarah was in the home office, surrounded by papers and open filing cabinets. The shredder was running, and the recycling bin was overflowing with destroyed documents. She looked up as we entered, her eyes wild, a handful of papers clutched to her chest. "You can't be here," she said, her voice high and brittle. "I changed the locks." The court representative stepped forward, presenting the injunction. "Mrs. Thompson, you need to step away from those documents immediately." "These are my personal papers," she protested, but her voice wavered. I moved to the shredder, unplugging it. "Sarah, it's over. James came to see me this morning." The color drained from her face. What?" "He showed me your messages. About the offshore accounts, the plan to leave the country, it's all documented now. She sank into the office chair, the papers falling from her hands. He betrayed me? After everything I promised him? The police officer began gathering the scattered documents while the court representative explained the injunction. Sarah sat there, seemingly in shock, as her last desperate attempt at damage control crumbled around her. I started photographing everything. The shredded documents, the emptied filing cabinets, the state of the office. Each click of the camera seemed to make Sarah flinch. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small. "Now," I said, continuing to document the scene, "you face the consequences of your actions. The fraud attempt with the house, the unauthorized sale of my belongings, the drained accounts, and now this attempted destruction of evidence. It's all going to come out in court." She laughed, a hollow sound that held no humor. "You've got it all figured out, don't you? The quiet, patient husband, always so careful with his documents and his records. I bet you planned this from the beginning." "No, Sarah. You planned this, the house grab, the account drainage, the evidence destruction. I just paid attention and kept records." I paused in my photography. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice? That I was too absorbed in my garden and my boring job to see what was happening?" The court representative was bagging documents as evidence, carefully noting everything that had been shredded or damaged. Sarah watched the process with a detached expression, as if she couldn't quite believe this was happening. "I had it all planned so perfectly," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "The house sale, the account transfers, the new life with James, it was all supposed to be so simple." "Simple?" I couldn't help but laugh. "You tried to steal my house, Sarah. You drained our accounts, sold my belongings, planned to flee the country. How was any of that simple?" She looked up at me, and for the first time I saw something like understanding in her eyes. "You were never the passive, unaware husband I thought you were you?" "No," I agreed quietly. "I wasn't. I was just patient enough to let you show your true colors." The next few hours were a blur of legal documentation, police reports, and careful evidence collection. Sarah remained surprisingly quiet throughout, watching as her carefully constructed plans were dismantled piece by piece. By late afternoon, the house was secured, the remaining documents were safely in legal custody, and Sarah was facing not just divorce proceedings, but potential criminal charges for attempted fraud and destruction of evidence. As she was escorted out by the police officer, she turned to me one last time. "I never thought it would end like this." "No," I replied, watching her leave. "You thought it would end with me being thrown out of my own house, with no money and no recourse. Funny how things work out." The quiet husband she'd underestimated had just watched her world unravel, document by careful document, and there was nothing left for her to say. The weekend after Sarah's failed attempt to destroy evidence marked a turning point. The frantic energy of the past week gave way to a different kind of atmosphere, one of reconstruction rather than reaction. The house, now legally secured against any further attempts by Sarah to access it, felt both empty and full at the same time. Empty of the chaos she'd brought, but full of possibility. I spent Saturday morning with Robert, going through everything we'd documented. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showing systematic withdrawal patterns, emails detailing her plans with Jennifer, texts to James about offshore accounts, and now the attempted destruction of documents. Each piece told part of a story that Sarah could no longer deny or manipulate. "She's facing serious consequences," Robert said, organizing files on his laptop. The attempted property fraud was bad enough, but the evidence destruction and the planned flight. She's looking at potential criminal charges beyond just the civil case. I sat in his office surrounded by the paper trail of my marriage's dissolution. "What about James and Jennifer?" "James's cooperation and self-reporting will probably save his career. though he'll face some disciplinary action. Jennifer's already agreed to testify about the fraudulent property transfer attempt. She's more worried about saving her real estate license than protecting Sarah. The betrayal still stung, but it was a duller pain now, more like an old injury than a fresh wound. And the house? Completely secure. We've filed additional protective orders to prevent any further attempts at access or transfer. The locks have been legally changed, and Sarah's been formally barred from the property. Robert leaned back in his chair. You can move back in whenever you're ready. The thought of returning to the house brought mixed emotions. Yes, it was my home, the place I'd put down roots both literally and figuratively. But it was also the site of Sarah's betrayal, her failed attempt to steal everything I'd worked for. Later that day, Michael helped me move my things back from his place. As we carried boxes into the house, he noticed my hesitation. You know, he said, setting down a box, you could sell it, start fresh somewhere else. I shook my head, looking out at the garden through the kitchen window. No, this is home. Sarah tried to take it from me, but that doesn't change what it means to me. The garden had survived Sarah's chaos surprisingly well. The tomatoes were ripening, the herbs were thriving, and the flowers I'd planted along the borders were in full bloom. Nature, it seemed, paid no attention to human drama. Throughout the afternoon, friends began stopping by. Real friends, ones who had seen through Sarah's manipulations and stood by me. Lisa brought lunch. Karen came with a bottle of wine and more apologies, which I gently refused. She had been manipulated too. And even Claire stopped by briefly, still looking guilty about her unwitting role in Sarah's schemes. I got a call from the Bar Association, Claire mentioned as she was leaving. They're launching a formal investigation into Sarah's actions. Her law career, well, it's not looking good. I absorbed this information with a strange mix of emotions. Sarah had risked everything, her marriage, her career, her reputation, in her attempt to take what wasn't hers, and in the end, she'd lost it all anyway. As evening approached, I sat in my garden, a glass of wine in hand, watching the sun set. The past week had revealed so much, not just about Sarah, but about myself. The quiet, patient man she'd dismissed as passive had turned out to be her undoing. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Final inventory of recovered documents completed. Sarah's lawyer requesting settlement talks. They're in a weak position, and they know it. I set the phone aside, focusing instead on the peaceful garden around me. The settlement talks could wait. Right now, I needed this moment of quiet victory. This reminder that sometimes the best response to chaos is steady, patient strength. The sound of the evening birds, the smell of the herbs, the feel of the cooling air. Everything felt more vivid somehow, more real than it had in the weeks of living with Sarah's hidden schemes. The garden, which she had always criticized as a waste of time, had become a symbol of resilience. While she plotted and manipulated, these plants had simply grown, following their own natural rhythm. A text from Michael lit up my phone. You okay over there, brother? Better than okay, I replied. I'm home. And I was, not just in the physical space of the house, but in the deeper sense of being exactly where I needed to be. Sarah had tried to force her version of reality onto the world, tried to bend truth to her will through manipulation and deceit. But in the end, truth had its own power, its own patient way of emerging. The quiet husband who tended his garden had turned out to be stronger than the schemer who thought she could rewrite reality. And now, surrounded by the growing things she had never understood, I could finally breathe freely again. The sun set completely, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Tomorrow would bring more legal proceedings, more revelations, more steps toward the final dissolution of my marriage to Sarah. But tonight, in this moment, I had everything I needed. My home, my garden, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing That sometimes the strongest response to chaos is simply to stand firm and let the truth emerge in its own time. Looking at the garden I'd nurtured through seasons of sun and rain, I realized that growth, whether of plants or people, couldn't be rushed or manipulated. It required patience, attention to detail, and the wisdom to know when to act and when to wait. Sarah had never understood that. But then again, Sarah had never really understood me either, and in the end, that had been her greatest mistake. The following weeks brought a series of endings and beginnings, each one marking another step away from the life Sarah had tried to destroy. The legal proceedings moved forward with a momentum that seemed to surprise everyone except Robert, who had meticulously prepared for every possibility. Sarah's final attempt at damage control came on a Tuesday morning, delivered through her new lawyer, a stark contrast to her previous confident demands. The settlement offer landed in Robert's email with what felt like a whimper rather than the bang she'd probably intended. She's offering to sign a full confession about the attempted property fraud, Robert explained during our meeting. In exchange, she wants us to drop the criminal charges and agree to a quick, quiet divorce settlement. I sat in his office, looking out at the city skyline. And what do you think? Honestly, she's desperate. The Bar Association's investigation is picking up steam. James has provided them with extensive documentation of her planned flight risk, and Jennifer's testimony about the fraudulent property transfer is damaging, to say the least. Robert leaned back in his chair. She's trying to salvage what's left of her career. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah, who had always prided herself on being the clever one, the mastermind, was now reduced to begging for mercy through legal intermediaries. What happens if we don't accept? Robert smiled slightly. Then we proceed with both the criminal and civil cases. Given the evidence we've accumulated, the bank records, the documented fraud attempt, the witness testimonies, her attempted evidence destruction, she's looking at potential disbarment and criminal charges. I thought about Sarah's smug smile that Sunday morning, the way she'd laughed while dropping my duffel bag at my feet. Let's proceed with the cases. Are you sure? It'll mean a longer, more public process? I'm sure. I met his gaze steadily. Some things need to come to light, Robert, not for revenge, but for truth. The next day, Sarah made one last attempt to reach me directly. I found her waiting by my car after work, looking nothing like the polished lawyer she'd once been. Her designer clothes had been replaced by simple jeans and a sweater, her carefully maintained appearance showing signs of strain. "Please," she said as I approached. "Just talk to me. We can work this out." I stopped a few feet away, keys in hand. "Everything goes through the lawyers, Sarah, you know that. I'll sign whatever you want," she pressed on, her voice taking on that familiar manipulative edge. "The house, the accounts, you can have it all. Just drop the criminal charges. Please, Mark, they're going to disbar me." "Actions have consequences," I replied calmly. "You tried to steal my house, drain my accounts, sell my belongings. You were planning to flee the country with my money. Did you really think there wouldn't be repercussions?" Her composure cracked. "I was desperate. You were so content with your simple life, your garden, your modest goals. I wanted more. And that justified fraud, theft, planning to leave me with nothing." "I never meant," she started, then stopped, perhaps realizing how hollow her excuses sounded. "You never meant to get caught," I corrected her. "There's a difference." She stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch my arm. I moved back. "What happened to you?" she whispered. "You used to be so manageable." The word hung in the air between us, revealing more about our marriage than any legal document could. "I was never manageable, Sarah. I was patient. You just couldn't tell the difference." Later that evening, sitting in my garden with a glass of wine, I received an email from Robert. Sarah's lawyer had withdrawn her settlement offer. They would proceed with formal proceedings for both the criminal and civil cases. The garden had flourished in the weeks since Sarah's departure. The tomatoes were heavy on their vines, the herbs had grown thick and fragrant, and new flowers were blooming where I'd planted seeds in the spring. Life, it seemed, had its own way of moving forward. Michael stopped by with dinner, taking his usual seat on the garden bench. "Heard about Sarah's little ambush today," he said, passing me a container of his wife's lasagna. "You okay?" "Better than okay," I replied, watching a hummingbird visit the flowering vines. It was the final confirmation that I needed. Of what? That the woman I married never really existed. She was always playing a role, seeing me as something to be managed rather than someone to be partnered with. Michael was quiet for a moment, taking in the peaceful garden scene. "You know what's funny? She never understood that this, your garden, your patience, your attention to detail, these weren't signs of weakness. They were your strength all along." The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the flourishing garden beds. Somewhere in the city, Sarah was probably meeting with her lawyers, trying to find a way out of the mess she'd created. But here, in this space she'd never understood or appreciated, everything was growing exactly as it should. The quiet husband, who tended his garden, had turned out to be stronger than all her schemes and manipulations, not through dramatic confrontations or clever maneuvers, but through the simple power of patience, truth, and careful attention to detail. Looking at the thriving garden around me, I realized that Sarah's greatest mistake hadn't been the fraudulent house grab or the drained accounts. It had been her fundamental misunderstanding of strength. She had seen my quiet nature as weakness, my patience as passivity, my contentment as lack of ambition. She never understood that true strength often grows quietly like the plants in my garden, steady, resilient, and ultimately unshakable. "You're doing that philosophical gardener thing again," Michael observed with a grin. I smiled, raising my glass. "To growing things," I said, "and to letting truth take root." The sun dipped below the horizon, but the garden still hummed with life, bees making their last rounds, birds settling in for the night, plants reaching toward the fading light. Sarah had tried to destroy everything I'd built, but in the end she had only succeeded in revealing her own weakness and my hidden strength. The quiet husband who tended his garden had emerged stronger than ever, rooted in truth and growing toward tomorrow. 1 year later, I stood in my garden on another Sunday morning, but everything was different. The legal proceedings had concluded months ago, their outcome as inevitable as the changing of seasons. Sarah's carefully constructed world had crumbled completely, piece by piece, like autumn leaves falling from trees. The criminal charges had led to a plea deal. She avoided jail time, but lost her law license. The civil case had been even more decisive, with the judge particularly harsh in his assessment of her attempted property fraud and planned flight. Last I heard, she'd moved to another state, trying to rebuild some semblance of a life away from the ruins of her failed schemes. The garden had gone through its own transformations. Where Sarah's Mercedes had once sat in the driveway, I'd built a new raised bed that now overflowed with herbs and flowers. The spot where she'd dropped my duffel bag that fateful morning had become home to a thriving grape arbor, its vines reaching skyward with quiet determination. "Looking good out here," Michael said, joining me with our traditional Sunday morning coffee. He'd kept the routine we'd started during those first difficult weeks, though now it was more about brotherhood than support. "Amazing what can grow when you remove the things holding it back," I replied, inspecting a cluster of ripening grapes. The house had changed too. Gone were the stark modern pieces Sarah had insisted on, replaced by comfortable furniture that actually invited living rather than just looking. Her home office had become my library, walls lined with the books she'd always complained took up too much space. Every room reflected not just my taste, but my truth, "Did you see the email from Claire?" Michael asked, settling into one of the new Adirondack chairs I'd built last summer. I nodded. Claire had reached out occasionally, keeping me updated on Sarah's attempts to appeal her disbarment. Sounds like her latest appeal was denied. You ever regret not taking that settlement offer? The question made me pause, looking out over the flourishing garden. No, I said finally. Some things need to come to light, not for revenge, but for justice. She needed to face the consequences of her actions. My phone buzzed, a message from Karen, who'd become a genuine friend after breaking free from Sarah's influence. She was coming by later with her kids, who loved helping in the garden. It was one of many unexpected gifts that had emerged from the wreckage of my marriage. Authentic friendships, stronger family bonds, and a deeper appreciation for genuine connections. Remember how worried everyone was about you living here alone? Michael grinned. Now this place has more life than it ever did with Sarah. He was right. The house had become a gathering place for family and friends, filled with laughter and honest conversations, rather than Sarah's careful manipulations. The garden hosted weekend barbecues, teaching moments with Karen's kids, and quiet evenings with people who appreciated both silence and growth. "Speaking of life," I said, "Emily's coming over for dinner tonight." Michael's eyebrows shot up. Emily was a landscape architect I'd met at a community garden project. Our relationship was moving slowly, thoughtfully, both of us understanding the value of genuine growth over rushed connections. "She's still amazed by your victory garden," he teased, using her nickname for my flourishing space. "She understands it," I replied simply. And she did. Unlike Sarah, Emily saw the garden for what it was, not a hobby to be tolerated, but a testament to patience, care, and the quiet strength of growing things. The morning sun climbed higher, highlighting the dew on the tomato plants and casting shadows through the grape arbor. 1 year ago, this same light had illuminated Sarah's attempt to destroy my life. Now it showed only growth and renewal. Robert had called last week with news that the last of the legal loose ends had been tied up. Sarah's final attempt to claim a portion of the house's value had been dismissed, and her remaining appeals were exhausted. It wasn't the ending she'd planned that Sunday morning, but it was the one she'd earned through her own actions. You ever wonder what would have happened if she'd actually read those refinancing documents? Michael asked, refilling our coffee. Cups. I smiled, remembering Sarah's confident signature on papers she never bothered to understand. She saw what she wanted to see, in the documents, in me, in everything. That was always her biggest weakness. The garden hummed with life, bees visiting the flowering herbs, birds nesting in the arbor, new seeds sprouting in freshly turned soil. Sarah had once mocked all of this, seeing only wasted time and dirty hands. She never understood that while she was plotting and scheming, I was building something real and lasting. "You know what's funny?" I said, watching a hummingbird visit the flowers Sarah had once called common. She thought she was going to destroy me that morning. Instead, she freed me to become more fully myself. Michael nodded, understanding. In the year since Sarah's failed power play, he'd watched me transform from the quiet husband she'd tried to discard into someone stronger, more authentic, more alive. The garden that Sarah had dismissed as a waste of time had become a symbol of everything she couldn't understand. The power of patience, the strength in steady growth, the beauty of letting things develop in their own time. While she had rushed to force her version of reality, nature had simply continued its quiet, unstoppable cycle of growth and renewal. "To new seasons," Michael said, raising his coffee cup. "To new seasons," I echoed, looking out over my flourishing domain. The quiet husband who tended his garden had not only survived Sarah's attempts to destroy him, he had thrived, growing into something stronger and more authentic than she could have ever imagined. In trying to tear down my world, she had only succeeded in helping me build a better one. The morning sun continued its climb, warming the rich soil and encouraging new growth. Somewhere in another state, Sarah was living with the consequences of her actions. But here, in the garden she had never understood, everything was blooming exactly as it should. The story she had tried to write that Sunday morning had become something entirely different. Not a tale of her triumph, but a testament to the quiet strength she had never seen coming. In the end, the truth had grown as naturally as the plants in my garden, unstoppable and beautiful in its own way. And I, the quiet husband who had once seemed so easy to dismiss, had finally grown into my full strength, rooted in truth and reaching toward tomorrow's light. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.